Hi everybody. I'm calling this video the Git Addendum video, even though the first bit isn't about Git. It's sort of it's Gitish related, let's call it that. So here's what I'm going to cover. I'm first going to talk a little bit about alterations we can make to package.json. One thing we can do is do shortcuts to how we want to run an application. So instead of typing stuff on a command line, we can add it to this file. And it could provide a shortcut for us. We'll see that. I'll show you how to add set environment variables in package.json and how you can use those environment variables in your code. And I'll talk briefly about running things as sudo, not really related to package.json. Well, sort of related to package.json. We'll see that shortly. So that's the first thing I want to cover. Then I want to cover git ignore, which perhaps you already know, but I just wanted to make sure everyone knows it. A lot of these are things that you may already know, but I'm just reviewing it just to make sure that we don't have any gaps in what we know. Then something very specific to GitLab, which is GitLab groups. I'll talk about that and how to add members, particularly me and the lab aide, to your group. And then for sure things we know, just how to create a repository in GitLab itself. All right, so let's get started. So package.json, shortcuts to running applications. Okay, so here I am on the bottom in my terminal, and as we are running applications by going node and then the name of the application. And off it's running there, and here I am, and I can send a request. Hopefully, maybe I didn't hit it. There we go. And I get the results back. So that's the way we've been running applications. Another way we can do it is we can make a shortcut to this command, namely node todo.js, in our package.json file. And here, let me show you how to do that. So it's the script section, which you probably already have. The name the name of the shortcut, a really common one, is start. And then in quotes, we're going to give it the command we want to execute. So in this case, node todo.js. And make sure to stick in that comma, else we'll get an error. All right, so that's how we do it. The format is the name of the shortcut or script, start, and then what commands to execute, node todo.js. And I'm going to go ahead and save that. And now, instead of doing node todo.js, I can do npm run, and it's going to run a particular script, so it knows to look here in this script section. And my options here are start and test. I'm going to run start. And here it's running, and it says it's running node todo.js. And again, I can come here, send that information, and I get the result. Let me stop that. This is not the best example because actually typing node todo.js seems a lot shorter than running npm run start. But as we'll see, as the commands get longer, these shortcuts are really handy, and especially as we'll see in React. So let's say there's cases where we want to set some environment variables, and one good case would be when we're dealing with ports. So in our development environment, we've been working with port 8080. When we're going to run stuff in a production mode, we'd probably want to use port 80 mostly. So we can do it a number of ways. We can switch everything to 80, but let's say we want our development environment to still be on port 8080, but when we're in production, we want to use port 80. And we don't want to keep editing our code here to say 8080 and 80, so we don't want to need to go in and alter, because someday we might forget. We might, clone our repository, it has 8080 in it, and we forget to edit it and say 80 and things break. So let's see how to do that. So we're going to set an environment variable, and I'm sure environment variables were covered in an earlier class, 225. And I'm going to call this environment node port because it's going to be the port number equals, and then 8080. And then the rest of the line is, I'm keeping the same as the command. And let's call the next shortcut start prod for production, so start the production machine. And I'll do the same thing. I'll say node port equals 80. And the command is node to do.js. So that's what I'm doing. I'm setting an environment variable to either 8080 or 80. Now I need to alter to do.js to use this environment variable. The environment variable is called node_port. Okay, here I am. That's the 8080 that's hard coded into my code. And now I'm going to say process and whoops. So process.env for environment, and then the name of the variable, node port. That's it. So this references the environment variable. Let me just save that I set here in package.json. So let's see if this works. And I broke something. Okay, let's take a look what I did wrong here. And I see my error. It's the comma error I always make. Put a comma at the end of that line. Things shouldn't work better. Okay, there I'm running node port 8080, node to do.js running. And just to verify that, here's my 8080. I'm going to send information and I get the results back. So that works perfectly fine. And the reason, or one reason why we're not running 80 all the time is, well, let me just show you. So I'm going to say start prod here. So I'm going to go npm, let me clear, sorry. I'm going to type npm run start prod, and I get a bunch of errors. This means, at least on the Mac and on Linux or Unix machines in general, that I don't have permission to run a program on port that's listening to port 80. So there's one of two things I can do. So the first one I can do is when I'm in just developing mode, I can use port 8080 and switch to 80 only when I need to. I can force that by going sudo npm run start prod, right? Because sudo is now going to log me in as root or run this command as root, so I should be able to have access to port 80. Okay, and it says it's running, so let's give this a shot here. Let me get rid of some of these numbers on the top. So localhost 80, and I get good results. So there, so I've shown you how to create environment or set environment variables in JSON. We've seen how to reference environment variables in our JavaScript file. And when we want to run stuff on port 80 and we get an error, like that one I just showed up here, which sometimes is hard to understand what's the problem, it's because we don't have sufficient permissions to run on port 80. The solution is to run it as root using sudo. So that's these tasks listed under 1. Let me move now to Git ignore. And as the name suggests, this enables us, Git, to ignore certain files and directories in our directory that we have under our repository control. So let's take a look at that. Let me stop this. So there are some things that we don't want Git to keep track of, or we don't want Git to save. One of these, in our case, is this node modules. Right, that has lots of files in it. If we load it, or just take a look at it rather, you can see there's, let me scroll here, that's kind of a lot of stuff that we don't really need in the Git repository, so we want to ignore that. And let me just do that. Let me clear again. So we put files, the names of files and directories we want to ignore in the file.git ignore. That's what we're going to do. So I just want node modules ignored. I think it's modules. And I'm going to put that in .git ignore. Yes, it is node modules. So here, let's just take a look at, it's not showing up under git ignore. Oh yeah, there it is. So that was a way of just preventing me from having to open an editor, that echo. But here we have this line, ignore node modules. let's say we're in a different language, we're in C++ or something where we have to compile things, and we have this directory bin that's going to contain all the binary files. Again, that's something we don't want Git to keep track of, to save. So we can add that file or directory as well. We can say ignore everything that's in node modules and ignore everything that's in bin. So that's what .gitignore is, and it could be quite handy for you. Well, in particular in this case, when we have things, there is some JavaScript, as we'll see in the React videos, something similar to bin, and for sure we're going to be ignoring node modules. So let's clear that. And let's do the stuff we know, the git init. Let's just add everything now. And we see we have .gitignore, life, package, these package things in to do, and we don't have bin, and we don't have node modules. So gitignore is doing its job. Okay, now let's go to GitLab and see if we can create a repository there. Okay, here I am in GitLab, and one thing I failed to mention in the previous video is it'd be nice if your 350 code was in what they call in a group. So we're going to, a group is just a collection of repositories. It's sort of unique, I think, to GitLab. And what it enables us to do in this class is if you give me and the lab aide permissions in the group, that trickles down to all the repositories that you're making. And it makes it just a lot easier for us to take a look at what you're working on. So that's kind of the advantage for us. To do that, there's the menu item of the 3 bars here. Click Groups. And you can see that someone's in a previous class I left up. So now you can see I have permission as a reporter to access that group. But I'm going to create a new group here by going to this green method. And I can call it whatever I want. CS350 coursework. That looks good. I don't need a permission or an avatar. I want to keep it private. The reason I'm asking people to do private, internal, and public is that a year or so ago, some students cheated by going into other people's repository and just copying code. And it was kind of clear that they didn't have a clue what was happening in their own, in the code they were claiming was their own. So now, just to kind of avoid that, I'm asking people, and the reason I switched to GitLab is now we can make things private, so that temptation isn't there for people. So I'm going to create this group, and the group was successful. And now here under members, I'm clicking, and I can add a new member to CS350 coursework. So I can search for a person, Fiona, I think her name is Helbron. Maybe it's .Helbron. Yep. And I can give her a role. I like reporter because that gives us the opportunity to actually look at your code, and you can read more about what these do. So reporter can, there's a lot of things they can do. They can download the project and do things along those lines, see commit statuses, things along those lines. So that's really what we would like. Let me back up here perhaps. So as a reporter, if you want to expire us at the end of the semester, go for it. Other than that, I'm going to add this person as added to the group. And that's it. So that's all you need to do to add us meaning me and the lab aide to your group. And you can see I'm at Saharsky. That's my username. All right, so let's add a maybe. Go back there. And I'm going to do a new project. And let's call it, their suggestion is my awesome project, but let's call it to-do list. And that's good, to-do list. private, and all looks reasonable to me. Okay, and here it gives you some instructions for what to do if you are creating a brand new one. We already have an existing folder here, so we've done that, and or an existing Git repository. So I'm going to copy this. And okay, and one last one. I don't have any tags, but for completeness, I might as well do that task. Okay, so there, I've updated everything in I now have things in GitLab with this project called To-Do List. And there we see all the files we put in, and everything looks good. So that's it. That's all I wanted to mention to you. So what we've covered, just to kind of summarize, is some additions we wanted to make to package.json. Showed you how to ignore stuff. This important thing as far as the class goes, to make groups, just makes life a little easier for everything. And then the basics of just this repository. So that's it. Next up, how to load everything and get a production server working in Google Cloud. Bye, everyone.